So for us as Christians, the biblical text and the way that we move from biblical text to meaning is really at the center of our faith. We are people of the book. And so there's a lot to that whole process, and you may be starting to hear more of these words buzzing around, especially as you're studying the scriptures. What does hermeneutics have to do with exegesis, and what does that have to do with this other discipline of discourse analysis? How do these all fit together? Well, you could see it as ever-expanding horizons, where what you're doing in discourse analysis is you're taking the details of the text. You've got the particular cues that the author has for communicating meaning, communicating in particular the relationship between the different lines, the different sentences and clauses within the passage, and saying, now here's how this all flows together. I'm preaching a sermon, and Moses in Deuteronomy 30 is giving you the call, so choose life, and that call to choose life is rooted in these reasons that have just come before it. And the way in which the passage is structured in terms of its particular words helps you to see, these are the reasons that lead to this powerful conclusion. So discourse analysis makes you attentive to those cues. It helps you to see how each individual language, in the case of the Old Testament Hebrew, New Testament Greek, it helps you to see how those languages have their own conventions for communicating the flow of a passage or the flow of a discourse. So then your horizon emerges from that to exegesis, and really exegesis is kind of the whole process of biblical interpretation, which is not just about, how do I understand the flow of the discourse analysis question, how does this relate to this? But exegesis is everything. I mean, you've got, what does this individual word mean? And how can I be very careful in negotiating the different semantic possibilities for this word? Exegesis deals with larger literary issues. How does this particular section here of this chapter of this book relate to the rest of the book? How can I go about these in a way that's rigorous, that is not sort of ad hoc, but where I'm really being principled in how I think about the process of interpretation. And that takes you to then the largest scope of all, which is hermeneutics, which is dealing a lot of it with the particular questions of exegesis and then even more narrowly discourse analysis. But what you're doing in hermeneutics is asking kind of the big meta questions. How does my particular context influence how I'm reading? Or how does the context of the author connect me to him? And not only that, but how do I think in a principled way about, say, how this particular text not only functions on its own as a book, but how it functions as an ancient book in an ancient culture? You see, that's a hermeneutical question. Or again, how do I think about this book as it functions within a canon? And you see there's a hermeneutical question there of how do I treat this book properly? As one person says it, hermeneutics is a way of seeing as. I'm seeing this book as, and then some would see, an ancient book as sort of a conglomerate of a long editorial process. Well, that influences then how you interpret it. Or if you see a book as a sacred book, a divine book, that has not only a human author but a divine author, well then that changes how you read it. You're reading it as something other than simply a human document, and that gives new hermeneutical questions like, well now what do I do when this passage here doesn't seem to agree with this passage over here? Well, we would handle that differently if we're handling a divine book than, say, a human book. So hermeneutics is really asking those big questions of how am I to see this book? And not only that, how am I to see myself as a reader so that I can be faithful as an interpreter of Scripture?